And good evening, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It is called McDuff Lives 2, or McDuff Lives 2, Lives, however you say it. McDuff Lives 2. This is the backup channel. What a surprise today. I got a strike from a show that we did with the trio with Professor Hamamoto and George Webb and myself. And I couldn't even tell what the date was, but it had to be at least 3 months old. And I think it was like one of a year or so ago. So are they just sending out random strikes nowadays? Because I looked through the whole thing and I saw nothing. They said it was inciting of violence or condoning of violence or something. And it was nonsense. This is exactly the thing that stimulates me to get mad at them and to fight back. Because they don't tell you why they deny your appeal. And I filed an appeal. I said, there's no violence in this. They said, well, you lose. They didn't say, well, here's the violence, or look at here's the words you use. No, they just say, well, we've reviewed your content and it sucks. So you violate all of our community guidelines. Their community consists of 5 jerks sitting around and throwing spitballs at things. They don't know what they're doing over there. It is a perfect example of why we have to win this, because they're incompetent and they turn everything over to computers and nitwits. The main point being to harass us until we quit trying to tell the truth on them. But it isn't going to work. So again, thank you very much for coming over to the backup channel. I haven't been here in about 3 months. Last time I had 2 strikes. This time we only got 1. So it's a 1 weeker unless they go digging through my dirty underwear again and seeing what they can sniff out. Those people are crazy. Oh well. So what? The big problem for me is I don't get, the big crowd, because I only have 1,000 followers here and I have like 7,000 some over there. So not everyone's going to get the word, but I see Tyrone is here, so that's enough for me. But being here is here. Robert is here. Melissa, Corky, David, all the son 4945 is here, and Kate Gowan. Hello, Kate. Yes, computers and nitwits running the world. It shows you how much they care, doesn't it? Hmm. This is my nice O'Loughlin mug that my good buddy Ted Kingsbury sent me a couple years ago for a birthday present, and I like it because it's big. It can hold a whole lot of ginger tea. Cold here today, 30s, low 30s. No fun. Professor got a strike last week. Yeah, they're I think they really are just spitballing. Just let's hit this guy, let's hit that guy. Or what I think it is that they're after George, and anything I've got with George in it, they're just going to try to find a reason to knock it down. Um, and that's again, it's counterproductive because it fires me up, and I think it happens to most people, that love freedom and like to think if you're charged with something, you get to defend yourself and not just being told you're guilty. Well, we have considered your case, Mr. O'Loughlin, and we find, drum roll, you're guilty. Oh, well, I guess that's all there is to it. Um, I've got this, I've got the book, and the simple answer is it's great. If you want to get into this stuff, into the real nitty gritty of it, um, it's worth reading because it's really good. It's good writing. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a highly skilled lawyer, a trial lawyer, and he's really put together a beautiful case here. It's not going to prove what you want it to prove, but because it's not, it's not a legal brief, but what it is a collection. It's an encyclopedia of all the references that we do need to keep a hand and learn the names. I'm going to start tonight with something that is my personal interest, and that's learning about how did the AIDS pandemic get started, and that is in chapter 5 of the book. I want to remind you that Mark Kulak over at Housatonic Live has published uh, a uh, a book reading of the entire book, and that's great. I'm not going to read the whole book, and it's certainly not my place to do that. So don't look for me to read the whole book. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to pick certain places that I think are important. But before I do that, I want you to know that the whole book is very, very important. And even if you don't agree with it, it organizes the material in a way that you can just go through and say, oh, okay, well, that's one I agree with, that one I don't, this one I do. All right, I just want to read a little bit, and just reading this stuff really makes me angry. So excuse me if I get upset, but that's and I don't like to get upset, so I'll try not to. The HIV heresies, chapter 5, we're on page 178 of the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. A global war on democracy and public health. That puts it very, very well. It's exactly what it is. They want us to not know enough to be a good citizen, so we can't have a democracy. And they want to destroy our health so we don't live long enough to figure out what they're doing. Hey, Route 3, how you doing? How's Texas tonight? All right, here we go. I'll read this little quote from Khalil Gibran at the top here. A man living outside the circle of delusion, which imprisons most men, has a question of everyone he meets, usually asked silently. Can you get outside of yourself for even a split second to hear something you have never heard before? Those who learn to hear will enter a new world. Khalil Gibran. I hesitated to include this chapter because any questioning of the orthodoxy that HIV is the sole cause of AIDS remains an unforgivable, even dangerous heresy among our reigning medical cartel and its media allies. But one cannot write a complete book about Tony Fauci without touching on the abiding and fascinating scientific controversy over which he characterizes as his, quote, greatest accomplishment and life's work, unquote. From the outset, I want to make clear that I take no position on the relationship between HIV and AIDS. But of course, that's the real problem with all of this virus vaccine thing is there a real relationship between the alleged germ or virus and the symptoms that are produced? Does HIV cause AIDS, or does it just happen to be one of the things that people that have AIDS have in them? But wait a minute, what if they have AIDS but they don't have HIV? What do you do about that? Doesn't that undermine the whole idea of a virus causing AIDS? Well, let's read some more. I include this history because it provides an important case study illustrating how, some 400 years after Galileo, politics and power continue to dictate scientific consensus, quote unquote, rather than empiricism, critical thinking, or the established steps of the scientific method. It is a hazard to both democracy and public health when a kind of religious faith in authoritative pronouncements supplants disciplined observation, rigorous proofs, and reproducible results as the source of truth in the medical field. While consensus may be an admirable political objective, it is the enemy of science and truth. The term settled science is an oxymoron. The admonishment that we should trust the experts is a trope of authoritarianism. The admonishment that we should trust the experts is a trope. Um, the admonishment that we should trust the experts is a trope of authoritarianism. Science is disruptive, irreverent, dynamic, rebellious, and democratic. Consensus and appeals to authority, be it CDC, WHO, Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, or the Vatican, are features of religion, not science. Science is tumult. Empirical truth generally arises from the tilled, agitated, and upturned soils of debate. Doubt, skepticism, questioning, and dissent are its fertilizers. Every great scientific advance in history, every transformative idea, from evolution to heliocentrism to relativity, met initial ridicule from the panjandrums of scientific consensus, quote unquote. As novelist and physician Dr. Michael Crichton observed, quote, consensus is the business of politics. Science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right, which means that he or she has results that are verifiable by reference to the real world. In science, consensus is irrelevant. The greatest scientists in history are great precisely because they broke with the consensus. There is no such thing as consensus science. If it's consensus, it isn't science. If it's science, it isn't consensus, period. Specifically, the original hypothesis on AIDS is an illustration of how vested interests, in this case, Dr. Anthony Fauci, using money, power, position, and influence, can engineer consensus on incomplete theories and then ruthlessly suppress dissent. Now, I make reference to this earlier book from 1979, which I read some of and made some comments about last week, Rockefeller Medicine Men. And we see that the theme of Rockefeller Medicine Men is how the medical profession became intertwined with industrial capitalism. And what happened was the medical profession, which was not a very well, highly esteemed profession in the 19th century, was lifted up both in its image and in its income by the generosity, I guess, of the great wealthy people, the barons of the gold of the Gilded Age, Rockefeller, Carnegie, all of the foundations got started then, especially the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations, and not too long after that, the Ford Foundation. But these foundations were used to steer medicine in the direction that their corporate owners wanted it to go. And that has led them into what's called the germ theory of disease. And according to the germ theory of disease, any disease you have is caused by some little bitty thing. They used to say germ, then they started saying, identifying things as bacteria or uh, other little particles. But then the idea of a virus came along, and this is a very, very complex and useful concept for them because, I mean, you can get two or three different definitions of a virus. Some of them say that it's alive, some of them say it's half alive, or some of them say it's dead, and the different descriptions of it are, you know, it's not a fixed and scientifically accepted idea of exactly what a virus is, but nevertheless, because it represents the ideal of a single little thing, a germ that by definition is a biological agent that is too small to see with a regular microscope. That's what a germ is. Well, a virus is a little bitty germ that's too small really for anybody to see. They say they've seen it on electron microscopes, but you can debate that. Excuse me. Hmm. Baker, it's either under Housatonic ITS or he may have stored it over on Rumble. You know, Mark sometimes takes his shows down after not too long, so he doesn't get strikes. So you might have to check both places. But his backup is Odyssey and Rumble, I think. Whereas mine is right here on YouTube. And let's see, we have 35 people here. That's good. Yeah. I haven't tried Rumble yet myself, Baker. Mouse, Catherine and I are Catherine's doing all the heavy work. She's creating playlists and storing all of our archives on BitChute. And it's called McDuff Uncensored on BitChute. If you want to visit over there, you'll see some of the things that have gotten cut from YouTube. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, incomplete theories and ruthlessly suppressing dissent. The many thoughtful critics of Dr. Fauci's central canon offer various plausible but wildly divergent alternatives to the official orthodoxy that HIV alone causes AIDS. There is one issue upon which they all agree. During the 36 years since Dr. Fauci and his colleague, Dr. Robert Gallo, first claimed that HIV is the sole cause of AIDS, no one has been able to point to a study that demonstrates their hypothesis using accepted scientific methods. In other words, they can't prove it. You couldn't prove it in a court of law without it being an accepted scientific method. The fact that Dr. Fauci has obstinately refused to describe a convincing scientific basis for his proposition or to debate the topic with other qualified critics, including the many Nobel laureates who have expressed skepticism, makes it even more important to give air and daylight to dissenting voices. Even today, incoherence, knowledge gaps, contradictions, and inconsistencies continue to bedevil the official dogma. The unified chorus demanding blind adherence to that official dogma drowned out the lively public disputes of earlier years and ignored the clamor for scientific proof. An obsequious national media has consecrated the orthodoxy and anointed Anthony Fauci with an infallibility formerly reserved for popes. In the February 28, 1994 issue of New York native Nina Ostrom wrote an editorial titled, quote, "The Canonization of Anthony Fauci," unquote. Anthony Fauci, the man who has so mangled and misdirected U.S. AIDS research that 13 years into the epidemic, there is no clear idea of its pathogenesis and no effective treatment, was recently raised to near sainthood once again by the New York Times. Isn't it great? Did you see this stuff now? It's like the Gibran said, you know, if you're able to step outside the circle of delusion that imprisons most men, then you get to live in a new world. And the idea that the New York Times is not your friend you know, most people are still looking at the New York Times as the standard of great journalism. Most people are. I'd say 90% of people still think of the New York Times, if unless they're just very, very right wingers and would never look at it. But the standard of journalism is what people think of. Wow, they wouldn't just lie. Yeah, they would. Been doing it a long time. It's a CIA outlet. That's all it is. With some nice pretty pictures and ballet and all of the great cultural stuff of New York thrown in. Hey, thanks, AC Truth. Thank you very much. So yeah, I think this is a good place to start because we can see the pattern as our author says. There's a pattern here, and the great iconic example of it is how they really, really just oh, all right, let's read. Instead of responding to critics by answering common sense inquiries, Dr. Fauci has cultivated a theology that denounces questioning of his orthodoxy as irresponsible, uninformed, and dangerous heresy. It sounds like YouTube. It's axiomatic that American democracy thrives on the free flow of information and abhors censorship. So Dr. Fauci's extraordinary capacity to ruthlessly silence, censor, ridicule, defund, and ruin prominent dissidents seems more congruent with the Spanish Inquisition or with Soviet and other totalitarian systems. Today, quote, the First Amendment simply does not apply to Tony Fauci, says Charles Ortleb. Any scientist who disputes his official cosmology or any of the canons that promote the orthodoxy that HIV is the one and only cause of AIDS is dead in terms of the rewards and sustenance of science. Finally, many of the tactics Dr. Fauci has pioneered to dodge debate, bedazzling and bamboozling the press into ignoring legitimate inquiry of the credo and undermining, gaslighting, punishing, bullying, intimidating, marginalizing, vilifying, and muzzling critics have become his mainstays for derailing skepticism about his mismanagement of subsequent pandemics, including COVID. So, without attempting to draw conclusions about the underlying HIV/AIDS disputes, it is worth reviewing the weapons Dr. Fauci honed during his natal struggle to construct and fortify a quote, scientific, unquote, theology. The loudest, most influential, and persistent challenge to the thesis that HIV might not be the only cause of AIDS came from Dr. Peter Duesenberg. Peter Duesberg, Duesberg, who in 1987 enjoyed a reputation as the world's most accomplished and insightful retrovirologist. Specifically, Dr. Duesberg accuses Dr. Fauci of committing mass murder with AZT, the deadly chemical concoction that, according to Duesberg, causes and never cures the constellations of immune suppression that we now call AIDS. But Duesberg's critique goes deeper than his revulsion for AZT. Duesberg argues that HIV does not cause AIDS, but is simply a, quote, free rider, unquote, common to high risk populations who suffer immune suppression due to environmental exposures. While HIV may be sexually transmittable, Duesberg argues, AIDS is not. Duesberg famously offered to inject himself with HIV tainted blood, quote, so long as it doesn't come from Gallows Lab, unquote. For starters, Duesberg points out that HIV is seen in millions of healthy individuals who never develop AIDS. Conversely, there are thousands of known AIDS cases in patients who are not demonstrably infected with HIV. Dr. Fauci has never been able to explain these phenomena, which are inconsistent with the pathogenesis of any other infectious disease. Many other prominent and thoughtful scientists have offered a variety of well-reasoned hypotheses to explain these baffling fissures in the HIV orthodoxy. Most of these alternative conjectures accept that that HIV plays a role in the onset of AIDS, but argue that there must be other cofactors a qualifier that Dr. Fauci and a handful of his diehard PIs, that's professional investigators, which is a term of art I guess they use in medical studies, PIs, that Dr. Fauci and a handful of his diehard PIs stubbornly deny. Prior to advancing his own theory for the etiology of AIDS, Duesberg methodically laid out the logical flaws in Dr. Fauci's HIV/AIDS hypothesis in a groundbreaking 1987 article in Cancer Research. Dr. Fauci has never answered Duesberg's common sense questions. In his subsequent book, Inventing the AIDS Virus, Duesberg, in 724 riveting pages, expands his dissection of the hypothesis's flaws and outlines his own explanation for the etiology of AIDS. For those subsumed in the theology that HIV is the sole cause of AIDS, Dr. Duesberg's critiques seem so outlandish that they automatically debase anyone who even considers them. It's telling then to discover how much traction his arguments have among the world's most thoughtful and brilliant scientists, including many Nobel laureates, perhaps most notably Luc Montagnier, who first isolated HIV. To date, Dr. Fauci has been able to silence but not to answer or to refute Duesberg's thesis. I restate that I take no side in the dispute. It seems undeniable to me that the dissidents have raised legitimate queries that should be researched, debated, and explored. I believe public health officials have a duty to answer these sorts of questions, and I yearn to hear those arguments in an energized debate. Dr. Fauci's aggressive censorship campaign and his refusal to debate arouse my suspicion and my ire. It brings to mind George R. Martin's observation that entrenched powers remove men's tongues, not to prevent them from telling lies, but to stop them from speaking the truth. If any of Dr. Duesberg's revelations are solid, his story has momentous relevance today, as the removal of his tongue illustrates the capacity of the pharmaceutical cartel in league with self-interested technocrats to exaggerate and exploit viral pandemics, to foist toxic and dangerous remedies onto a credulous public, and promote self-serving agendas, even those with terrible outcomes, with the complicity of a fawning and scientifically illiterate media. Duesberg and others charge that by stifling debate and dissent, Dr. Fauci milled public fear into a multi-billion-dollar profits for his pharma partners while expanding his own powers and authoritarian control. The resulting policies, they say, have caused calamity to global economies and public health and vastly expanded the pool of human suffering. The first time someone, Dr. Tom Cowan, a physician from Northern California, suggested to me that HIV was not the sole cause of AIDS, I dismissed the comment as ridiculous. I had watched many HIV positive friends die of AIDS during the 1980s and 1990s. I personally knew two of the celebrities, Arthur Ashe and Rudolf Nureyev, whose pioneering deaths from AIDS shocked the world at the epidemic's dawn. It seemed self-evident that HIV was the culprit. I had no idea that the supposition was controversial. I have since learned that today, a disturbing number of virologists quietly doubt the theory that HIV is the sole cause of AIDS. To understand the skepticism by many of the world's leading scientific minds, we need to venture back through history and briefly down a very deep rabbit hole. That journey pulls the curtain back on a shockingly corrupt NIH culture, that's National Institutes of Health, culture distinguished by lacunae that most Americans associate with politics, not science, cutthroat ambition, backstabbing duplicity, and moral bankruptcy. Isn't that what really bothers us all is the moral bankruptcy of them? Just like the whole thing with YouTube giving me a strike and never not taking a moment to explain why. It's immoral. It's unhuman. It's not a human interaction. And if we let them get away with it, you're just never going to be able. You just be beaten on the ceiling, saying, "Let me speak. Let me," and there will be no answer. It'll just be silent because they won't talk to you. It's horrifying. Well, listen, we're just getting started here. Moral bankruptcy. In July 1981, CDC reported a unique outbreak of immune deficiency related health problems in a group of highly promiscuous gay men in Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco. A May 1983 Science article by French Institut Pasteur virologist Luc Montagnier first identified a retrovirus that would later earn the name HIV. Montagnier believed that he had detected signals of HIV in the lymph nodes of some of the AIDS victims he had sampled. After hearing a lecture by Montagnier, Dr. Robert Gallo, a blustering, ambitious National Cancer Institute researcher, entrepreneur, and homophobe, persuaded the Frenchman to send him a sample of the newly discovered retrovirus, promising to use his considerable influence with the journal Science to get Montagnier's work published expeditiously. Instead, Dr. Gallo stalled the publication to give himself time to cultivate and steal Montagnier's virus. With the help of other HHS officials, Gallo then claimed Montagnier's pilfered virus as his own discovery and used an imaginative and cunning retinue of subterfuges and intricate frauds to obscure his larceny. In his book, Science Fiction, A Scientific Mystery, A Massive Cover-Up, and the Dark Legacy of Robert Gallo, Pulitzer Prize-winning Chicago Tribune reporter John Crewdson meticulously documents Gallo's brazen flim-flam, perhaps the boldest, most outrageous, and most consequential con operation in the history of science. The book exposes Gallo as a mountebank who built his career poaching discoveries from other scientists and claiming them as his own. Scientists who worked with Gallo described his NIH lab, where he presided over some 50 scientists with a budget of $13 million, as a den of thieves. One of Gallo's scientists told Crewdson, "It's hard to be an honest person in this place." She said she knew 3 employees who committed suicide. Gallo confided to a henchman that he liked to hire foreigners, quote, because if they don't do what he wants, he can deport them. Gallo's former mistress and lab employee, Flossie Wong-Staal, that's Wong-Staal, reported that Gallo voiced his craven need for the Nobel Prize and his bitterness at being denied the honor so frequently that it was practically a rhetorical device. It was natural that Gallo found a powerful and reliable ally in Tony Fauci. Gallo's, quote, proof, unquote, that the cause of AIDS was a virus as opposed to toxic exposures, provided the critical foundation stone of Dr. Fauci's career. This claim allowed Dr. Fauci to capture the AIDS program and its attendant cash flows from the National Cancer Institute and launch the project of building NIAID into the world's leading drug production empire. On April 23, 1984, Gallo recruited his boss, HHS Secretary Margaret Heckler, to lend credulity and weight to his dramatic announcement. Heckler took the stage before a packed scrum of international press. "Good afternoon," she told the world. "Ladies and gentlemen, first, the probable cause of AIDS has been found, a variant of a known human cancer virus." She pointedly added, quote, "Today, we add a new miracle to the long honor roll of American medicine and science." Heckler's participation at Gallo's press event was important stagecraft because it gave the imprimatur of NIH's institutional gravitas to a theory that had not been subject to peer review. Only later did the public learn that the NIH allowed Gallo to delay the announcement until he had personally patented an antibody kit that he claimed capable of detecting HIV. He had developed the test at taxpayer expense. Crutzen writes that Gallo conspired with a CDC official, James Curran, to improperly certify Gallo's test as an equivalent in quality to a far better test developed by Montagnier. Gallo would make himself a millionaire from his innovation while fanning fears of the presumably deadly virus, which coincidentally drove sales. A subsequent lawsuit over Gallo's swindle by the French government ultimately forced Gallo to disgorge half his proceeds. Gallo's premature announcement pioneered a new strategy of, quote, science by press release that would become a familiar mainstay in Dr. Fauci's arsenal of narrative control, culminating in the COVID-19 pandemic. The journal Science did not publish Gallo's paper until over a week after his spectacular TV press conference. At the time, Gallo's tactic marked a severe breach of professional scientific etiquette. This gimmick assured that nobody could review Gallo's work prior to his proclamation. Both Dr. Gallo and Dr. Montagnier, who had devoted their careers to studying retroviruses, were cancer researchers. Before the appearance of AIDS, both men had vainly strived to implicate retroviruses as the culprit in leukemia. In 1975, before he ever published a paper on the subject, Gallo gained national headlines when he publicly announced his discovery of a human retrovirus, HL23, that he claimed caused leukemia. He told colleagues he expected to win the Nobel Prize for his detection of HL23 in human leukemia cells. He didn't. Major labs around the country were intensely interested in HL23, but when they requested samples from Gallo, he ordered subordinates to damage the infected cells before sending them out to make them useless for research by others. Leukemia incidence was exploding at the time, but ethical elasticity apparently insulated Gallo against qualms about purposefully delaying vital research during a global pandemic. Other scientists complained that they could not reproduce Gallo's success. Subsequently, two groups of U.S. researchers literally made a monkey out of Gallo's discovery, if not Gallo, by proving his HL23 virus was actually a humiliating laboratory contamination consisting of a melange of three viruses from a gibbon, a woolly monkey, and a baboon. Instead of a Nobel laureate, Gallo became a laughingstock. Undeterred by mortification, Gallo declared that a so-called HTLV virus, which he also claimed to discovered, parentheses, he had stolen the work of Japanese researchers, according to Crutzen, was the cause of AIDS. Puzzled that he could not reproduce Gallo's results, another AIDS researcher working with gay patients asked Gallo if the discrepancy was because Gallo might be studying a different risk group. Quote, was your patient a Haitian? A hemophiliac? The scientist queried. Quote, it was a fucking fag, said Gallo. Pardon me for that. When asked to address Duesberg's announcements about the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, Gallo often dismissed Duesberg's objections because, Gallo suggested, Duesberg was gay or mentally disturbed. Parentheses, Duesberg is straight and sane. Quote, Duesberg comes to meetings with guys with leather jackets and the hair and so on in the middle. I mean, that's a little bit odd. Doesn't it speak of something funny? Unquote. Those were the sorts of petty defamations that Gallo generously offered instead of argument to defend his work. But Gallo's failure to demonstrate that he could find HTLV in the blood of men suffering from AIDS threatened to put the final nail into his naked Nobel ambitions. At the height of that personal crisis, Gallo learned of Montagnier's success. Unwilling to accept defeat by the French, he gulled the credulous virologist into sending him a sample, which he cultured on a substrate that, according to Crutzen, he stole from yet another scientist. When he succeeded in finding signs of Montagnier's virus in the blood of gay men suffering from immune system collapse, Gallo rebranded it HTLV and claimed it to be the same virus he had lately, quote, discovered. Gallo's lab notes obtained by the Chicago Tribune show that Gallo renamed the French virus repeatedly, apparently to further obscure its pedigree. The following spring, Science published the 4 papers from Gallo's lab, upon which Gallo's celebrity as the Superman of AIDS entirely rests. The first paper reported Gallo's isolation of a so-called new virus from AIDS patients. Gallo's lab had apparently cultivated and rechristened the French virus. The second paper declared that the new virus had been isolated from a total of 48 subjects, a finding that would go far toward proving that the virus caused the disease. Examination of Gallo's lab notes by the Chicago Tribune found no traces of these 48 isolates. American and French governments skirmished over which scientists discovered HIV until the combatants agreed in 1987 to call it a co-discovery. The WHO delayed its response for 2 years, as Gallo employed a series of artifices to pretend that there were 2 different viruses. By delaying the announcement of the French scientists' earlier discoveries, Gallo stalled the introduction of a widely available blood test for the AIDS virus by about a year. During that 1983 to 1984 interregnum, thousands of hospital patients and hemophiliacs received tainted blood from blood banks and became infected with HIV, and many of the already infected unwittingly spread the virus. The Nobel Committee awarded Montagnier its prize in 2008, conspicuously snubbing Gallo, whose notorious ethical lapses were by then abundantly documented. Gallo's unsupported claims and sketchy conduct resulted in 2 U.S. government inquiries into his professional ethics. Pulitzer Prize-winning John Crutzen's 55,000-word expose in the Chicago Tribune documenting Gallo's theft provided a withering portrait of Gallo as a sociopath and a pathological liar who employed thieving felons to run his lab. A pirate enterprise engaged in pilfering money from the federal government and swiping discoveries from other scientists. The Sturm und Drang around the competing claims obscured the fact that both cancer researchers produced scientific papers that did nothing more than suggest their retrovirus might cause AIDS. Montagnier always moderated his own claims that HIV was proven the sole cause of AIDS and would eventually disavow the theory. Recalling how public revelations about Bob Gallo's acrobatic chicanery during his efforts to link leukemia to HIV had nearly destroyed his career, Nobel laureate Kary Mullis, that's Kary, Mullis, Mullis, who unfortunately died in August 2019, just before the COVID-19 pandemic, noted, quote, HIV didn't suddenly pop out of the rainforest or Haiti. It just popped into Bob Gallo's hands at a time when he needed a new career, unquote. Duisberg later said, quote, he stole the fake diamonds from Luc Montagnier, unquote. Interesting, fake diamonds, right? Pouring concrete on confirmation bias. But like Dr. Fauci, Gallo had both the PIs and the press in his pocket. NIH's mythical prestige lent Heckler's statement near religious authority. The medical establishment quickly embraced Gallo's scientific hypothesis. Suspending traditional skepticism toward government pronouncements, the press ordained Gallo's theory as indisputable doctrine and beatified Gallo as a saint. Says journalist and editor Mark Gabrash Conlon of Gallo's big press event, quote, the conference was held before any of Robert Gallo's papers were published. Therefore, before any other scientist had a chance to review them and look at the evidence and ask, has he got it right or wrong? Gallo's announcement was a windfall for Anthony Fauci. Pinning the AIDS epidemic on a virus allowed him to divert the cascading river of AIDS money from the National Cancer Institute into NIAID's overflowing coffers. Dr. Fauci opened the floodgates of NIAID cash to develop new antivirals against HIV. he unleashed his kennel of grant-hungry PIs to concoct and test new drugs that would kill the virus. Remarkably, Dr. Fauci never funded to completion a single grant to explore whether HIV actually caused AIDS. Federal law requires that NIH's grant review committee be composed of true peers, independent outside scientists knowledgeable about a given proposal's subject matter, to assess the application on its scientific merit. Ignoring those laws, Dr. Fauci began populating these committees with his own PIs. Researchers who reliably supported Dr. Fauci's orthodoxy watched their applications sail through the approval process, but scientists seeking to research ideas that departed from official doctrine encountered impenetrable obstacles. In 1988, a veteran NIH awardee, Seymour Grufferman, had his first experience with the new regime. Grufferman, the former chairman of NIH's review committee, had submitted a proposal to study the phenomenon of chronic fatigue syndrome, a touchy subject potentially threatening to the dominant cosmology, since many of Dr. Fauci's critics believe that chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS, is non-HIV AIDS. Quote, "I never got scores like that before," Gufferman told Hillary Johnson, author of Osler's Web. "My data sheets were atrocious." When he protested to Dr. Fauci, he recounted, "Dr. Fauci was nasty." Dr. Fauci's tsunami of research money poured the concrete of confirmation bias onto Gallo's hypothesis. NIAID's, that's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, PI Army, the Professional Investigator Army, welcomed the fierce new bug hunt around this novel medical mystery. Quote, "Thousands of health science PhDs seeking government grants rushed to study the virus." Historian Terry Michael recounts, Dr. Fauci's PIs became the fierce guard dogs of the pervasive HIV orthodoxy. Nobel laureate Kary Mullis knew the effect of NIH funding on cementing official dogma. Quote, "All the old virus hunters from NCI put new signs on their doors and became AIDS researchers. President Reagan sent up about $1 billion just for starters," noted Mullis, who in 1993 won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his invention of the polymerase chain reaction technique, the PCR. Quote, "And suddenly everybody who could claim to be any kind of medical scientist and who hadn't had anything much to do lately was fully employed," unquote. Well, the next part of the book takes us into Africa. And there's where the real huge human tragedies happened. And of course, are still happening because of the corruption of medicine by corporate control, right? By allowing the corporations who are so sophisticated now and are so well represented and so good at media manipulation, allowing them to define what is and is not good medicine, what is and what is not a disease or a virus, what is or is not the appropriate therapy or medication, and to take away our right of consent, our right of informed consent. So this is a effort to take away our ability to control any part of our lives. And it's very, very serious. And I think that, this reminds me of when I'm looking at the reports from Canada and the truckers and uh, how willing these men and women and families are to make this terrific sacrifice uh, to try to turn this around, to try to bring us back, working towards freedom and not working towards slavery. It's also about eugenics. It really is. And I won't have time tonight to tie that all together. But if you remember what we read about eugenics in the book, The Guarded Gate, and by Daniel Okrent, also War Upon the Weak um, by Ed Black, and the revelations of uh, NSSM 200 by Kissinger, where he just comes out and says, we're going to have to cut the birth rate in the third world, or in all the countries that uh, we, you see the birth rate going wild, and they're afraid. They're afraid that all those people will figure out that they can take all this stuff away from the elites. So the answer is to try to get rid of them, and you can't just murder them. That would be World War II, and we've already said no. You can't just murder people anymore. You can't do that. But one of the really nasty popes, a guy named Montini, who had been, with the Vatican through World War II and doing everything that Pacelli wanted, Pacelli Pius XII, um, he passed that uh, encyclical Humanae Vitae, the human life, in which he said that you can't mess around um, with fertility unless it is done. It's incidental to battling disease, and that, to me, I think, is the key to this whole thing, because you wouldn't have all of these Catholics, the Knights of Malta, the Jesuits. You wouldn't have any of them, you know, participating in all of this stuff if the Pope hadn't said that, because he said, you know, yeah, I'm going to leave the door, a little crack in the door, where if you want to mess around with fertility, just make sure that it's, quote, incidental. It's just incidental, right? I can see Michael Myers going, incidental. It's just incidental. And they've been doing it. With these different. It's not just this vaccine. It's all these vaccines. Just put a little something in there. We already know that they can do it. They've been putting Terminator genes in the corn plants. Terminator genes where, you know, if you eat that corn, you ain't gonna have no babies. It's that bad. And that's our challenge. That's our challenge. All right, guys, thanks for being with me tonight. And I will do some more from this book. It's Thursday night, I think I have this on the schedule. Tomorrow night, I'm very happy to welcome Amber Connor back to the show for an update from Atlanta, and see what's going on with her. Always a real pleasure. And she has such a wonderful outlook. I always get a lot out of that. So Amber will be with us tomorrow night. And once again, I appreciate everyone. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We will be on the backup channel all week. And we will do whatever we need to do to keep getting the word out. Thank you so much.